Shalom and good day all, this is Tehillim29 back again for another DC comic review, and in these DC comic reviews I will be reviewing World of Krypton issue 1 by vids, Batman 89, and also the latest or the last issue that came out, but also the first Joshua Williamson Batman issue 118. So moving to the first comic that will be reviewed, and in this one we are beginning with World of Krypton for the first. So moving into first things first, does this cover in any way, shape or form have anything that connects inside with the story? Surprisingly it does, and with that I give the cover art 7 out of 10. I'll now show you some of the internal art from the beginning, middle and end, and we'll get to see some of the things that are also happening in the story, and I'll address the additional things when we get to them later. So this is some of the art around the beginning of the story, and as you can see there's something happening on Krypton, and there's one of the members. I'll now jump towards the middle, and as we look towards the middle we are greeted by members of the House of Al as well as other members who are also on the planet. I'll now move to the end, and last but not least, some art towards the end of the story. For the internal art, I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Now it's time to jump into the story and its rating. Now, one of the things that do take place time-wise, we do get 3 weeks later, but that 3 weeks later occurs after one of the first pages that I showed you early in the story. Of course, the location is in Krypton, and one of the other places we went to was Kryptonopolis. It sounded a bit cheesy, and it's sort of like a bit of a rip-off of Metropolis. I do think a better name could have been used, but it is what it is for the story. Moving into the next thing, being the cast of characters, we had Lara, Jor-El, Allura, Zor, Cora, Crew, Druzod, Naragua, and of course we had a resistance group that also made their appearance, and they were resisting against the House of Al, in other words blaming them for certain events that are happening on the planet. You get to see some of the work that Jor-El, it's Nira, who also communicates with Jor-El because she works on the area of some of the habitation on the planet. Of course, you get to meet Zor-El, Crew, Al. So you got to encounter some of the members of the Al family on Krypton. We of course met some of the Zods, including Druzod. Moving most of all in regards to the story rating, I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. I think this story is going to have to work a little bit harder to get higher in the rating. So it's going to be interesting to see what the upcoming issues lead to, and if I decide to collect this story any further. So now it's time to move on to the next. So now it's time to move into the next comic that will be reviewed, and that is Batman 89 issue 4. Jumping into first things first, does this cover in any way connect to something that's happening inside of the story? In some essence it does, but not overall, and this is where I gave the art an overall a 6 out of 10. Or the cover a 6 out of 10. I'll now show some of the art and bring up some of the things that are happening in the story before moving into the story rating. So moving into the beginning of the story, as you can see, there's a little bit of chaos in the streets. I'll now jump to the middle of the story, and here we go in the middle of the story at the House of Wayne Manor. And last but not least, towards the end of the story. For this, I also gave the internal art a 6 out of 10, as I felt like I didn't really enjoy it that much. So let's move into the next thing in regards to the story. Did this story in any way bring any comic references that linked to the previous issues? Nope, it didn't. What about time? Okay, about the only thing we got in relation with time was later. It didn't say how much later, it just said later. A little lazy on the writing, I must admit. Like, they could have done it, say, 3 hours later. Of course, we know that the location is Gotham, but another thing that could have been included in the story is the pointing out of the locations. Again, that lost points. About the only thing that was sort of done right in this was in relation to some of the cast of the characters, which were easy to identify. We, of course, had the new supposed Robin, the Alfred, even Harley made an appearance. We also had Bruce Wayne, Barbara Gordon, and of course Drake, who you see dressed up. Oh, and last but not least, Two-Face, or Harvey Dent Two-Face. For this, I gave the story a 5.5 out of 10. I must admit, I had high hopes for this story. It's starting to turn out to be very disappointing as it starts to move towards the end. So, it'll be interesting to see how the last couple of issues go. If they manage to nail it in the end, okay, I might consider picking up the trade. Might. Doesn't mean I will, but I might. But at the moment, I'm actually enjoying this Superman 78 more than the Batman 89. So now it's time to move into Joshua Williamson's Batman issue 118. And I must admit, I really quite enjoyed what happened here. And we'll get started with the cover and the cover rating. Now, does this cover in any way, shape or form connect to something that's happening inside of the story? Sure enough it does, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. I'll now move into showing the internal art, but I want to bring up something else as well. Seeing that we are getting one story in this, and only one story in this, how about we drop the price of this to about, I don't know, $2.99? Instead of $4.99? Okay, now that that little criticism's over, it's now time to move into the internal art. And one good thing about this issue is that it's only a one-issue story with no backstory in it. And thank goodness, it's really nice to see one issue with one story and no backstories in it. Starting off with first things first, here's some of the art around the beginning of the story. And one really good thing about this is the way how this story is done and written, and I like this. They see something that they think is the appearance of the bat, they were about to do something wrong. I'm not going to give away spoilers, but I did like what happened with this little part of the story. I'll now jump to the middle, and this is taking place at a billionaire's ball, which involves all of the villains. The villains. And of course we've got Firefly here, Croc, a couple of others. And last but not least, let's now jump towards the end, to where everything begins with this story as it connects to the Batman Incorporated, which is going to be happening. So for this internal art, I gave it a 7.5 out of 10 as it felt consistent all the way through. Moving into the next thing, the story. You already know that there are things that I personally enjoy in my stories when I rate them. So let's jump to the first one. And that is comic references. What comic references were there in this particular issue? Well, when this comic reference was brought up, it was actually in relation to the character of Ghostmaker. Though we didn't get to see him in the story, at least it was nice to hear him being brought up. And that gave us the reference to the Batman Annual 2021, issue 1. And that's why that reference was put there. In regards to the area of time was not addressed, even though it wouldn't have hurt to include it in the story. The locations that we saw here, of course, everything taking place in Gotham City. So we had the location of Gotham City. One of the other things that were happening there was the Billionaire's Ball, which we got to see where that was happening in one of the locations. We didn't get to know the exact location, but it wouldn't have hurt to include it in the story. And of course, we had I'm going to end up bloody grinding the living daylights out of this location. Budasia. That's how it sounded in the story. So, sorry for giving it a bit of a grinding. Time to move into the next. The cast of characters consisting of Batman. We had Oracle. Of course, we had a fair amount of Batman villains. We had the appearance of Nightwing. We had also Batman Inc. We had a picture and appearance of someone known as the Abyss. And last but not least, the character of Luthor. For this, overall, and in this story, because you do get to see Batman start to do some detective work in his travel to Asia, in regards to the connection of Batman Inc. or Batman Incorporated and what's happening there. We also had what was already happening in Gotham City. So overall, I gave this story a 7.5 out of 10 as it felt very fresh, I liked some of the things that happened. I do look forward to what's happening next. So until then, let's keep colourful and have yourself an awesome day.